Does he have an answer to literally every question out there? In this video, we'll see what Dr. Jordan Peterson has to say on how to prevail against Marxism, why he thinks Instagram hyper-users are psychopathic and narcissistic, and what does Peterson have to say about the attempts at canceling him and his family. Make sure to stick around and find out and see what else we've got in store for you, because one thing's for sure, Jordan Peterson has a lot to say. So let's get to it. Starting with Dr. Jordan Peterson on how to prevail against Marxism. Dr. Jordan Peterson sat down with Sky News' Rita Panahi for a good conversation about pretty much everything. And it wouldn't be a conversation with Peterson if Marxism wasn't broached at least once, don't you think? Peterson says that the only way for the West to prevail against the Marxist narrative is to tell a better story. I think the story meaning through responsibility is a better story. It's certainly a core Christian story, the best-selling author and public intellectual said, and in his eyes, responsibility to the ultimate degree is like voluntary self-sacrifice for the highest good. According to Peterson, to take the absolute responsibility means that you understand you have to accept and to forego immediate gratification in the service of something longer term or for a higher good. That's literally what it means, according to Peterson. He added that this is what is exemplified by the image of the crucifixion and the passion story. And isn't that what our entire Western culture has been founded on? Peterson then explained how he and a friend had recently visited a church in Jerusalem, which was actually the church, the first church that had been built on the exact place where Christ had been sacrificed. The church became the literal center of the community, and this is the template with which towns and cities all over the world were modeled. All of which to say, we need to get back to our roots and rediscover the purpose in them. Next up, Jordan Peterson. Instagram hyper-users are psychopathic and narcissistic. If you ask clinical psychologist and public intellectual Jordan Peterson, social media enables female antisocial behavior. Peterson admitted that he's deeply afraid of virtualization, enabling psychopathy, and fears it might even become a fatal problem to society, moving forward into a world that's becoming more virtualized all the time. Though Peterson claims it's just a small margin of people who exhibit psychopathic, Machiavellian, sadistic, and narcissistic, they're notoriously hard to keep under control, and Peterson simply isn't convinced that there's going to be a way to control them in an online environment, which affirms some of their more harmful belief systems, making them feel more empowered thanks to the internet as well. And it's a simple fact that when used in extremes, social media is usually because these platforms lure in people who tend to lean towards more narcissistic traits. Peterson claims that research has found that female hyper-users of Instagram are also sadistic, Machiavellian, psychopathic, narcissistic, and they tend to optimize for short-term mating strategies. Peterson noted that female pathology also scales exponentially when it comes to social media, and while he doesn't say that men don't do that, it's been proven that females are particularly good at it, which is probably why. Following, Jordan Peterson on the intense attempts at cancellation on his family. One of the cons of being a public speaker is the fact that not everyone is going to agree with what you're saying, and some of those will go out of their way to try and make that clear to you, even if they're really just strangers. As you might expect, Peterson has been the subject of confrontation from many people who don't agree with him on his views, which means that he and his family have been subject to intense attempts at cancellation dozens of times. In turn, some people praise Peterson for being brave, which isn't something Peterson agrees with. To him, keeping is much scarier than the fear of speaking up and saying the wrong thing. Peterson vehemently believes it's dangerous to allow other people to control your tongue, and he'd much rather be subject to some outbursts of irrational people attacking him every once in a while than remain silent on a matter that he has an opinion on. The attempts at canceling him have taught Peterson a few things. Peterson prides himself on always saying what he believes to be true, which means he always has to be careful. But it also means that those opposing him had no ammunition to bring him down. And he learned that if they could bear through the controversy without apology or backtracking and firmly kept their ground, those who opposed him at first sometimes ended up turning their coats. Hold up, didn't we promise more? Next, what does Jordan Peterson have to say on the successful society? Peterson interviews Canadian Premier Danielle Smith, and we'll close off with a fun little fact that you may not have known about Peterson and a Marvel villain. Make sure to keep watching to find out what it is. So let's continue. First up, Dr. Peterson on the successful society. Jordan Peterson's views on our successful society sound rather bleak. When it comes down to it, Peterson believes that all societies that have become successful have done so by educating themselves, but not necessarily from the desire to grow, but out of instinctive false compassion and envy. But Peterson asks, what is the opposite of will to power? Well, according to Peterson, most people wouldn't have an answer ready, which is exactly the problem. As for himself, Peterson thinks that the spirit of voluntary play is the antithesis of the spirit of power. But at the same time, he also believes that functioning relationships, those that are self-sustaining, productive, generous, and reciprocal, are optimized when they're based on the spirit of play as well. Peterson claims that it took him 30 years to articulate this, and those who are in power are usually not as articulate as Dr. Peterson to begin with. And while it's true that there are many attempts, especially from younger generations, that strive for equity as opposed to equality, Peterson claims that this is just something that's easy to make look attractive. At the end of the day, those in power were able to get that power because essentially they stole that power from someone else. And Peterson says that it's all built on the power of envy when it's been brought back to its core. Following, Jordan Peterson interviews Canadian Premier Danielle Smith. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith sat with Jordan Peterson to record a podcast hosted on the Daily Wire. Peterson introduced Smith as quite a firebrand from the West. The pair talked about everything from environmentalism and equalization to faith and family. Smith said that she thinks they have ceded the ground to the extremists like Extinction Rebellion, and they have yet to elevate the more moderate environmental voices, which is what she says will be her big challenge going forward. But don't all arguments that spiral out of control stem from an inherent misunderstanding because of a failure in the communication line? Both Peterson and Smith agreed on the matter of cost of energy, which is posing a grave danger to those who are living on a fixed income, especially during the coming January, February, March, and April, when it's going to be dangerous when people don't have reliable home heating. As Peterson has said before as well, and will probably say many times more, the people most impacted by the crisis are the ones at the lower end of the income scale, which are the most vulnerable people in every society. It remains to be seen how far the consequences of it will reach. Next, how Jordan Peterson influenced Marvel Comics' Red Skull. Would you believe it if we said that writer Ta-Nehisi Coates used Jordan Peterson's philosophies to create a version of the villain named Red Skull in the Captain America comic book series? Well, apparently he did. Peterson's fame hinges on his claim that what he's doing, speaking his mind, is for the greater good and that he helps people who need it the most. In Captain America number 28, Red Skull attempts to radicalize a group of young men by giving them a speech that sounds an awful lot like Peterson, as he goes on about how men secretly want to hear that they're great, but that the whole world is against them, but if they're men, they'll fight back. Captain America likes to talk of dreams in order to motivate people towards good causes, but Red Skull sits in the other end of the spectrum entirely and claims that nightmares are what motivates them as part of his complicated rhetoric. And as you probably know, Peterson is quite known for speaking of the idea of the abyss, the perils of nihilism and existentialism. So it's hard to miss the similarities between Peterson and Red Skull. Luckily, Red Skull is just a comic book villain, though the man may or may not have been a major inspiration for existence, does have a number of agendas that he pushes, which do translate nicely into the comics. And that was it. Do you agree with Jordan Peterson's viewpoints? Let us know in the comments what you think about the public intellectual. Don't forget to like and subscribe below. And thanks for watching.